The dog hit the door before anyone else moved. Not the handler, not the two MPs flanking the gurney. The dog, a Belgian Malinois, maybe 90 pounds, all black vest and muscle, cleared the threshold first and planted himself 6 inches in front of the man on the stretcher like he'd done it 1,000 times. Maybe he had. Vera Odum had been a trauma nurse for 7 years. She'd worked 3 of them at Naval Medical Center Portsmouth, and she thought she'd seen everything that came through the blast doors after midnight. She had not seen this. GSW left flank through and through, the paramedic said, not slowing down. BP dropped to 80 palp in the rig. He's been in and out for the last 12 minutes. Name? Vera asked, already moving alongside the gurney, her fingers finding the man's wrist. Classified, the MP on the left said. She looked up. He was looking straight ahead. I need a name for the chart, she said. Patient is designated Bravo 7 until command authorizes release. She let that sit for exactly 1 second, then turned back to the man on the gurney. He was in his mid-30s, dark-skinned, built like someone had assembled him from materials designed to last. His face was slack, but his jaw was clenched even unconscious, some deep-wired discipline that sleep hadn't fully reached. The dog. She still didn't know the dog's name, walked beside the gurney with his shoulder pressed against it, not pulling at the leash, just present, his amber eyes scanning every person they passed. When they came through the second set of doors into Bay 3, the dog turned and looked directly at Vera. She'd been bitten twice in her career, both times by patients' pets in the ER waiting room, both times her own fault for moving too fast. She knew what an animal looked like when it was deciding something. This one was deciding something. He needs to be secured, she said to the handler, a young Army Spec Ops guy who looked about 22 and hadn't slept in 30 hours. He won't hurt you, the handler said. Unless he decides to. That's not reassuring. It wasn't meant to be. Vera snapped a glove and stepped toward the patient. The dog shifted his weight forward, not growling, just moving, repositioning between her and the gurney. She stopped. He watched her. In her peripheral vision, she could see the handler's hand tighten on the leash, but he didn't pull. She had a patient bleeding out and a 90-pound dog deciding whether she was a threat. She held very still. Then she said, quietly, I'm going to help him. The dog's ears flicked. He didn't move. She took 1 step. He didn't move. She took another. His head tracked her, but his body held position, and when she reached past him to press her hand against the patient's wound, the dog sniffed her wrist once, pulled back, and sat down. The handler let out a breath like he'd been holding it since the parking lot. The patient's name, she learned 3 hours later, was Sergeant First Class Darius Lennox. She didn't learn it from the MPs. She learned it from the tall woman in plainclothes who arrived at 0147, badged through the secured wing with credentials Vera didn't recognize, and introduced herself as Special Agent Ines Cromwell, NCIS. I need to know who's had access to him, Cromwell said. She was maybe 40, lean, with the kind of face that gave nothing away on purpose. I've had access to him, Vera said. So has my charge nurse, the attending on duty, and the OR team, anyone else. 6 people who cleared your MPs at the desk, our MPs, Cromwell said, didn't clear anyone who wasn't on our list. Vera looked at her. What are you saying? I'm saying someone accessed his room at 0035 who wasn't on our list. I'm saying that person had a badge that scanned clean and an ID that matched someone who clocked out at 2200. She paused. I'm saying your hospital has a problem. Vera thought about the dog, who was currently lying on the floor of the observation room attached to Lennox's private suite, watching the door. She thought about how he'd looked at every person who came in, how he'd allowed her, and only her, among the nurses, to get close. What do you want from me? She asked. I want you to tell me everything you noticed tonight, everything that seemed off even slightly. I'm a trauma nurse in a naval hospital. Everything seems off slightly. Cromwell almost smiled. Not quite. Start from the beginning. What seemed off, if Vera was being honest, had started before Lennox arrived. She'd been at the nurse's station at 2358, charting, when she'd noticed a man she didn't recognize near the supply corridor. He wasn't in scrubs. He wasn't in uniform. He was in the kind of civilian clothes that were trying too hard to look like they weren't trying, pressed chinos, a gray quarter zip, clean shoes. He'd been looking at his phone, but his phone had been dark. She'd started to get up to ask him if he needed help. Then her radio had gone off with the incoming trauma alert, and by the time she'd looked back, he was gone. She told Cromwell this, Cromwell wrote it down without expression. What else? She asked. The dog, Vera said. He lets me get close. He hasn't let anyone else do that. Not without the handler right there. He's a trained military working dog. He's reading threat cues. I know what he's doing, Vera said. I'm telling you what he's doing. The question is why he reads me differently than everyone else. Cromwell looked at her for a moment. Why do you think? Vera didn't answer right away. She'd been thinking about this for the last 2 hours, between vitals checks, between the quiet moments when she'd stand in the doorway of Lennox's room and watch the dog watch her back. I don't know, she finally said. And that was honest. She found out at 0400. She'd gone back to check on Lennox. He'd stabilized, his pressure was holding, the surgeon was cautiously optimistic, and she'd stood at the foot of his bed making notes on his chart when the dog raised his head. Not an alert, not a warning. He just looked at her arm, her left arm. Her forearm specifically, where the sleeve of her scrubs had pushed up past her wrist. She looked down. The tattoo was visible. It had been visible plenty of times tonight, but she'd been moving fast, gloved, focused. Now she was still. The tattoo was a trident, small, maybe 2 inches, inked in black along the inside of her left forearm. She'd gotten it 11 years ago, at 21, 3 weeks after the funeral, her brother's funeral. Her brother Cale, who'd been a Navy SEAL and who had died in a training accident that the Navy had taken 4 years to fully explain to her family, and which she still, on certain nights, did not entirely believe had been an accident. The dog was staring at the trident. Then he stood up, walked to her side of the room, and lay down at her feet. She stood very still. Her throat was doing something complicated. In 7 years of trauma nursing, she had learned to keep her face neutral and her hands steady, and she was doing both of those things right now, but it was an effort in a way it hadn't been in a long time. You knew, she said quietly. Not to Cromwell, who wasn't there. Not to the handler, who was asleep in the chair in the corner. To the dog. You knew the whole time. The dog put his head on his paws and kept his eyes on her. Lennox woke up at 0612. He didn't wake up the way most patients did, disoriented, grasping, asking where they were. He came back like a switch being thrown, one moment absent and the next entirely present, his eyes open and scanning the room before his head had even moved. The dog made a sound Vera had never heard before, not a bark, not a whine. Something in between, something that sounded almost like relief. Lennox looked at the dog, then he looked at Vera. You're not my nurse, he said. His voice was hoarser than she expected. I am, actually, she said. You're not one of theirs. She didn't know what that meant. I'm the charge nurse on this floor. I've been with you since you came in. He held her gaze for a long moment, then he looked at her forearm. Your brother, he said. She didn't answer. What was his name? He asked. Vera Odum, she said. He was with SEAL Team 5. He died 11 years ago. Lennox closed his eyes, not in pain, or not only in pain. I know, he said. The word landed in the room and didn't move for a long moment. You knew Cale, she said. It wasn't a question. We went through Bud-SH together, he said. Different classes. We served 2 deployments together. He stopped. The muscle in his jaw worked. He was the best of us. Vera had held herself together in a lot of rooms. She'd delivered news that ended people's worlds and stood steady while they fell apart because that was the job, and she was good at the job. She held herself together now, but it was close. The dog, she said finally. Lennox opened his eyes. Coda. He was Cale's dog first. Handler rotation. Long story. When Cale was Kia, Coda was transferred. He's been with my unit for 8 years. He looked down at the dog, who had stood up and placed his chin on the edge of the bed. He remembers scent lines, trained for it. Cale's family scent. He's been carrying that in his head since 2015. She understood now, the way Coda had held back and then decided. The way he'd watched her all night like he was waiting to confirm something. The way he'd looked at the trident and then just let go. He'd known who she was before she did. At 0730, the morning charge nurse arrived, and Vera should have handed off and gone home. She'd been on for 14 hours. Her feet hurt, and her back hurt, and she had a 1-hour commute to a studio apartment in Chesapeake, where she would almost certainly lie down and not sleep. She was still in the building at 0800. Cromwell found her in the break room with a cup of coffee that had gone cold. We have a situation, Cromwell said, and sat down across from her. The man you saw in the corridor last night, we found him. Where? Stairwell B. He was attempting to access the Pharmasquad storage on the 3rd floor. She paused. He had a tranquilizer protocol that would have stopped Lennox's heart and looked like a medication error. Vera set down her cup. "He's in custody," Cromwell said. "He's a contractor who had legitimate access to this building for an unrelated project 3 months ago and apparently never returned his credentials." She looked at Vera steadily. "If you hadn't noticed him last night, and if we hadn't been looking, you would have found him eventually," Vera said. Maybe not before he found a window." Cromwell leaned back. "You want to know who he was working for, do I?" Cromwell considered that. "No," she said finally. "You don't. Not yet. That part's ongoing." She paused. "What I can tell you is that Lennox is one of 7 operators who have been targeted in the last 8 months. This was the most direct attempt. Your instinct last night may have been the thing that kept it from being successful." Vera thought about the man with the dark phone. The way her gut had registered something wrong, and then her radio had gone off and she'd turned away. "I almost didn't say anything," she said. "But you did," Cromwell said. There was a silence. Somewhere down the hall a cart rattled past. "Cale," Vera said. "My brother, was his death?" "I don't know," Cromwell said. Quickly, cleanly, like she'd been waiting for the question. "That investigation is 11 years closed. I don't have access to those files, and even if I did, this conversation would be the wrong place to go there." She looked at Vera. "But I'll tell you this. The pattern we're seeing now, it didn't start 8 months ago. We're tracing it back further." She paused. "I'll tell you more when I can tell you more." It wasn't an answer. It was the shape of one, with the middle cut out. It was more than Vera had gotten in 11 years. She went back to Lennox's room before she left. He was awake, sitting up, arguing with a doctor about whether he could have solid food. The dog was watching the argument with what Vera had decided was mild contempt. When she appeared in the doorway, Lennox looked past the doctor at her. "You're leaving," he said. "Shift ended 2 hours ago. Sit down for a minute." The doctor, perhaps sensing a losing battle on multiple fronts, stepped out. Vera sat in the chair the handler had vacated. Coda came over and sniffed her knee. Then he went back to his spot by the window. "He used to talk about his sister," Lennox said. "Said she was going to be a nurse. He was proud of that." She nodded once. Kept her face neutral. Mostly. "He talked about her like she was the tough one," Lennox said. "Like she was the one who held everything together back home while he was gone." "He was wrong about that," Vera said. "Was he?" She thought about the last 11 years. The questions she'd kept filing away because the answers weren't coming. The way she'd channeled everything into the work, into being good at the work, into the particular controlled competence of someone who has learned not to need things they can't have. "He wasn't," she said quietly. Lennox nodded. Like that was the right answer, like he'd known what she was going to say. "Cromwell is good," he said. "Whatever she told you, she'll follow through. She told me not much. That's how you know she's serious." Coda shifted at the window. Outside, Portsmouth was going about its morning. Trucks on the highway. A jet climbing out of Norfolk, somewhere to the south. The light was the flat gray white of an overcast May, the kind of morning that looked like nothing had happened and nothing was happening and everything was exactly ordinary. Vera stood up. "I'll be back tonight," she said. It came out like a fact, not a decision. "I know," Lennox said. She was pulling out of the parking garage when her phone buzzed. A number she didn't recognize, Virginia area code. She let it go to voicemail. Stopped at the exit gate, listening to the garage sounds, the hum of the fluorescents, the distant pulse of the hospital above her. Then she picked up the phone and called the number back. It rang twice. Then, "This is Cromwell. You just called me from a number I don't have," Vera said. "Yes, from your personal phone. Also yes." Vera was quiet for a moment. "You looked into Cale." "I'm looking," Cromwell said. "There's a difference. It'll take time. How much time? I don't know. But I'm looking." A pause. "Go home, Odum?" "Sleep. Come back tonight." "I was already planning to come back tonight." "I know," Cromwell said. "That's why I'm not telling you to stay home." The gate arm lifted. Vera pulled out into the gray morning, both hands on the wheel, the city unfolding ahead of her the way it always did, unchanged and unknowing. But something had shifted inside it, or inside her. The two were sometimes hard to tell apart. She drove, and for the first time in 11 years, she wasn't driving away from something. She was driving towards something she couldn't name yet, on a road she hadn't chosen, that had somehow been waiting for her all along. Coda had known. Before any of them, he'd known the moment she walked through the door.